The courtroom was thick with tension that morning. Oak benches creaked as people shifted uncomfortably, waiting for the hearing to begin. Sunlight streamed through the tall windows of the Franklin County Courthouse in Ohio, cutting through the dim air like shards of glass. At the front sat Officer Mark Collins, a decorated policeman with over 20 years of service. His uniform was crisp, his back straight, but behind his sharp exterior, his heart carried a heaviness most couldn't see. His gaze was fixed on the defendant, a man accused of kidnapping a child from a foster home 3 months earlier. In the gallery, quietly sitting with her foster mother, was a tiny girl named Emily, only 3 years old. Her big brown eyes darted nervously around the room, clutching a worn-out stuffed rabbit with threadbare ears. Emily had been through more in her short life than most adults faced in decades. She was the child at the heart of this case. No one had expected Emily to be in court that day. It wasn't common to have such a young child present, but her foster mother, Mrs. Jenkins, had explained to the judge that Emily had insisted on coming. No tantrums, no tears, just a quiet, persistent plea. "I want to see Man in Blue." They didn't understand at first. But today, as the proceedings were about to start, Emily stood on the wooden bench, pointed her tiny finger directly at Officer Collins, and softly spoke 2 words that froze the entire courtroom. "My hero." The words echoed, fragile but clear, bouncing off the marble walls like a gentle ripple in a still pond. For a full 3 seconds, there was absolute silence. Officer Collins blinked, his throat tightening. His hands, always steady from years on the force, trembled slightly on his lap. The judge, the lawyers, and even the hardened bailiff paused. It was as if time had forgotten how to move forward. Tears brimmed in Mrs. Jenkins' eyes as she wrapped an arm around Emily. Then slowly, like the sun breaking through storm clouds, understanding dawned across the faces of those present. 3 months earlier, Officer Collins had been the one who found Emily. Flashback, 3 months earlier. A freezing November night. Rain lashed against the cracked windows of a dilapidated trailer deep in the outskirts of Columbus. Officer Collins had responded to an anonymous tip about suspicious activity. He'd kicked open the rusted door and stepped into darkness, only to hear the faintest whimper from the corner. Huddled under a broken table, bruised and shivering, was Emily. Her cheeks hollow, her hands raw, her little body wrapped around a stuffed rabbit, the same one she clutched now. The man who had taken her, Charles Denton, a convicted felon, had fled moments earlier. Collins had chased him down through the mud and handcuffed him under the dim glow of streetlights. But it wasn't the arrest Collins remembered most. It was when he'd returned to Emily, knelt beside her, and whispered softly. "You're safe now, sweetheart. I'm here. I won't let anyone hurt you." Her tiny fingers had reached up and curled tightly around his badge. Officer Collins stood slowly, his breath shaky. He met Emily's gaze, her eyes wide and trusting, and for the first time in many years, the stoic officer felt tears escape down his weathered cheeks. He approached the gallery. The judge didn't object, no one could move anyway. Kneeling in front of her, Collins swallowed hard. "Hi there, Emily." She smiled, stretching her arms towards him. Without hesitation, she leaped into his embrace. The entire courtroom watched as this hardened officer, who had faced the darkest parts of humanity, cradled the fragile life he had saved. Reporters later described that moment as something sacred. Something human, beyond headlines and legal jargon. The defendant's trial resumed. Charles Denton was sentenced to life without parole, but by then, no one cared about the verdict as much as they cared about what happened after. 1 week later. Mrs. Jenkins knocked on Officer Collins' door. Emily stood beside her, wearing a sky-blue dress and holding her rabbit. She beamed when Collins opened the door. "We wanted to thank you," Mrs. Jenkins said gently. "Emily hasn't stopped asking about you." The old officer, who had never married and never had children, felt something stir deep inside. A seed long buried under years of duty and loss. He invited them in, and over cups of tea and scattered toys, a quiet bond began to form. Collins learned Emily had no known biological family. Her foster placement was temporary, and fragile. 2 months later, Mark Collins, the once lonely police officer, applied for custody of Emily. It wasn't easy. There were interviews, home inspections, evaluations. His colleagues were surprised, his neighbors curious. But through it all, Emily never wavered. Every meeting, every hearing, she'd hold on to his hand tightly and smile up at him with complete certainty. "She's been through enough," Collins once told the court commissioner. "I promised her I'd keep her safe. And I intend to." 1 year later. On a warm summer day, under the golden Ohio sky, Mark Collins officially adopted Emily. The judge who finalized the paperwork couldn't help but smile as Emily sat proudly on Collins' lap, her rabbit in one hand and his police badge gently clasped in the other. From that day on, Emily never had to fear again. The man in blue, the one she had called my hero, became her father. Years later, when Emily stood at her high school graduation, valedictorian and smiling with tears in her eyes, she spoke of that day in court. "Sometimes," she told the crowd, "a hero doesn't wear a cape. Sometimes, he just kneels beside a scared little girl and promises to keep her safe. And then keeps that promise for the rest of her life."